So when we renovated our old Vermont farmhouse, we got ripped off. I will tell you the whole story and all the gory details. And thank you, by the way, to our video sponsor today, Surfshark VPN. How are you doing this morning, Toby dog? Huh? Good to see you this morning, buddy boy. How are you? Yeah? Yeah? Did you have a good night? Yeah? So we first bought our farm in 2016. And at the time that we bought the place, we were still living in Washington, D.C. and just dreaming of moving up to Vermont to live on a farm. And when we bought the house, it needed work. Like, it wasn't in horrible shape, but there were a lot of things that needed to be done to fix up the house. It had old knob and tube wiring. There was an ancient oil burner that was about 50 years old. About 100 years prior, there was a major renovation that made the house go from 1.5 stories to 2.5 stories, but it lacked the right structural support. In fact, the house was actually sinking in on itself and it was completely uneven. There was no insulation in the house, which is kind of a need-to-have thing for a Vermont farmhouse. Like, when I say no insulation, I mean like if you took down some plaster on an exterior wall, you could actually see the daylight. The windows needed a lot of work. They were either broken or were unable to be opened or had major draft issues. And then there was like a lot of modernization stuff that we wanted to do in places like bathrooms and the kitchen. And so all in all, it just needed a ton of work. All in all, the house needed a ton of work, and we knew this when we bought it. In fact, we'd actually limited how much of a house we could buy in terms of the purchase price, just so that we could keep a bunch of savings set aside to do home renovations. And like I said, those home renovations that we wanted to do were pretty gosh darn extensive and expensive. And since my wife Allison and I had heard so many horror stories that people had experienced about living through home renovations, fire in the hole! We decided that we wanted to try to tackle the renovations while we were still living in Washington, D.C. And that way we wouldn't have to be living through a construction zone. And that right there was our first mistake. Out of the way, Shakira. Giving you fresh food, come on. Release the Kraken! So I still remember the weekend that we came up here. It was Labor Day weekend. My arm was still in a shoulder sling after having surgery. And Allison and I had booked like 6 or 7 different contractors that we were meeting with that weekend to take them through the property and start to go through the process of getting estimates, which would turn out to be one massive all-inclusive home renovation. Since we were still living in Washington, D.C. at the time, we resorted to Googling a whole bunch of different home builders and renovation folks. And so we were looking all over the state of Vermont for various folks who do renovation work. We had also worked up our tick list of all the things that we wanted to try to tackle and address. And so that weekend we gave tour after tour after tour and had meeting after meeting after meeting with all of these folks to talk about the home renovation. And man, I remember the day when the builder that we ultimately selected showed up at our farm. I remember seeing him get out of his truck and he looked at us and just sort of this slight smirk and smile appeared on his face. At the time, I think I took it for friendliness, but looking back on it now with hindsight, it was just sheer naked opportunism showing its face. You had these quote unquote rich folks from the city coming up here to Vermont looking to do a bunch of home renovation. They clearly didn't know much about building or construction, and they had a list of wants and demands that seemed like they were plucked out of an article in Country Living magazine. We must have appeared like the epitome of an easy mark. Let loose! Let loose! Now, a lot of you guys are gonna hear this story and you're gonna wonder why it took me so long to finally tell it in a video. Because really, when it comes down to it, I still have a lot of shame and embarrassment when I look back on just how stupid we were and how many mistakes we made when we renovated our farmhouse. I never grew up knowing much about construction or building things, and so that lack of knowledge made me very intimidated, almost too intimidated to ask too many questions. On the heels of that Labor Day weekend, when we had everybody come up and take a look at the house, we asked them to submit bids on renovating the house, and we just took a look at them and thought about a combination of which builders we liked and disliked and which builders had the lowest price and the highest price. And we picked the builder that we liked the most personally, who also happened to have a proposal of something that I would term as mid-range.
You're not very pretty, and you're not very bright.
And so once we had the builder selected, we got towards the process of contracting. And when we contracted, we basically set up a contract where we would give them a quarter of the overall construction cost up front. Then we would have a bunch of completion milestones that would lead to the rest of the payments. The contract appeared to give us enough control over the process and make sure that the work was getting done to the specifications that we had asked for. And so with a wire transfer of the deposit on January 5th, 2017, the renovations on our house began. There were going to be a couple of distinct phases for the work that we were doing on the house. The first phase was to gut the house and do a lot of the heavy structural stuff. So it started with tearing down the shed that existed between the house and the barn. They also went through and did a lot of the demo stuff that needed to happen inside the house for the remodel. And they also went downstairs in the basement and poured a whole bunch of pillars and columns and new support structure, as well as pretty much sistering every joist in this house. Because like I said earlier, this house was actually built in 1835, and when it was built in 1835, it was like a 1.5 story house. In like 1920-ish or so, they made it a 2.5 story house. But the Shaw family never did the extra like structural support work to support all the weight of the additional size of the house. And so after getting a pretty alarming civil engineer report, we made the decision to do a lot of that work. In the start of the project, actually things went pretty good. Like the first 6 weeks or so, a lot of work happened and a lot of the stuff that we were supposed to get done was getting done. The project was supposed to be completed by June, and so we were moving along at a very good clip. So much so that we actually made like our 50% payment, you know, right around that point when we'd gotten through a lot of the ugly stuff of ripping everything down, doing all the structural stuff, pouring concrete in the basement. We were now geared up for the next big phase, which was the wiring and the plumbing work and the HVAC work. And it was at that point that everything sort of grounded to a halt. It was actually at this point in the project that I realized that I was living through a real life version of the movie Money Pit.
How long do you think all that'll take?
2 weeks.
Really?
And our entire home renovation was turning into a money pit because days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, and months turned into, well, more months. And very little work was getting done. Allison and I were getting very frustrated with the progress of the project, but we also felt like we were trapped. Here we'd given half the money we had saved and set aside for the home renovation to this guy. Our house was in complete shambles, everything was ripped up and completely in demo mode. And so we were stuck in this sunk cost fallacy of feeling like we couldn't get out and move to another builder because we didn't have anybody lined up and our house was in shambles. And at the same time, not being able to get the builder that we had on hook do the work. But eventually, as the weather warmed up and we got into the summer, things picked up a little bit more and the crews showed back up and they started doing work again. But I noticed that it was smaller crews and the work was getting sloppier and sloppier, like they were rushing to try to get through it to get to another job. But that said, I was just grateful to have people here working on the house. And the work on the house was starting to progress into more of the finishing details, the aesthetic choices and that sort of thing. And that's actually where another major mistake that we made happened. So my wife Allison and I make decisions in two very different ways. I am an exceptionally decisive person who's really good at visualizing things. And so I would get these ideas in my head, I'd know exactly that that's what I wanted to do, and I'd be like ready to go and give the instructions to Michael and his team so that they could kind of go pull it off within the house. Like, I want to do the kitchen exactly this way, and I would even make like a drawing to show them exactly what I was thinking about for how the kitchen would lay out. But Allison, on the other hand, takes a little bit more thought and consideration with every decision that she makes. And she really needs to see something and be inside something to get a sense of what she wants and doesn't want. And well, this dynamic created a lot of problems for us on the whole home renovation project. Trust me when I tell you that this here toilet has caused more problems in our marriage than absolutely anything else. This toilet has made us fight so many times it's not even funny. For only 2 people living in it, our house is very big. It was originally built as a farmhouse for large farm families. Like in the 1940s and 50s, they were actually using it as a boarding house because it had so many rooms. But one of the things that we realized was while it had a ton of bedrooms, it didn't have enough bathrooms. You know, we envisioned having lots of family and friends come stay with us for extended periods of time, and there was really only one upstairs bathroom, and so we felt like we needed to put a second upstairs bathroom in. And so what we did was we actually converted this old bedroom into a bathroom. But to this day, Allison hates everything about this bathroom. She feels like it's a horrible waste of space. She also hates the fact that when you open the door, you walk right in and you see the toilet. She despises the color of the walls in the room. But at the end of the day, I feel like it's a pretty good, solid functioning bathroom. I mean, yes, for a bathroom, it's quite large and you don't need this much space. And the reason the toilet's right there when you walk in is because this wall originally had all of our water and plumbing on it and the other side didn't. And so we didn't want to have to run a whole bunch more pipes. And so it was very convenient to put the toilet here because our master bathroom's just on the other side of that wall. But the challenge is the way we made the decision about how we were going to turn this into a bathroom and where we were going to place the fixtures and what we were going to paint it were decisions that we made under the gun. You know, it was our builder coming to us saying, all right, where do you want the toilet? All right, what color do you want the room? Which are all very reasonable questions, and we hadn't given it enough thought. This gets into when you try to tackle a whole home renovation, you've got to make an insane number of choices and decisions. And when you're doing it with a spouse or a partner, that's a lot of agreement that you have to create amongst two people. And so even though Allison and I were able to come together and agree pretty easily on major things like parts of the kitchen renovation and what we wanted the living room to look like and a whole bunch of stuff like that, when it came to something specific like this project around the bathroom and where to put the toilet, we should have had a lot more discussion. But there were so many other decisions at play, we didn't have the time. And that's why I feel like we absolutely bit off more than we could chew when we tried to do the whole home renovation. And by the way, just as a little postscript, we actually have sort of come to peace on where this toilet is. As a way to use our space a little bit more efficiently, we decided to turn this bathroom into a bathroom/laundry room. The washer and dryer was originally down in the mudroom, which was very inconvenient, and it's very convenient having it up here. Now I just need to build some sort of like cabinet or built-in structure to like make it feel like it fits in better. And then I think we're gonna be in a very good place with what this bathroom's like. Which, by the way, another cool feature of our house, it's got a crazy number of old built-ins that we've been able to maintain over the years. Like these drawers right here, they're like basically our linen closet. So our construction project grinded on for weeks and months. And eventually by the fall of 2017, Allison needed to move up here. She was going back to school to get her nurse practitioner's license, and we had actually made the decision that we were leaving Washington, D.C. and moving up here. And so you know that situation I talked about at the beginning of how we wanted to avoid living through a home renovation? Well, this project that we had that was supposed to finish in the summer was still dragging on into the fall, and it was still only about 2/3 complete. And so unfortunately, Allison had to move up here and live through the chaos. But the one upside of that was we had somebody here on the ground full time. And because she was here full time, she was able to ensure that the crews were showing up and that the work was getting done. And the good news was, as the year was ending, we were getting to that stage where the electrical was in, the insulation was in, the plumbing was in, and now it was really down to like some of the basic finishing of repairing walls, repairing trim, painting, you know, doing all the detail work. And that's where we had yet another construction pitfall. In the contract, we had this quality clause where we wouldn't have to deliver payment unless we were getting the quality that we expected. I'd used that clause a couple of different times throughout this awful process, and I'm really glad that we put it into the contract. And like by December, most of the work was done, but there was still like some trim that needed to be done, some painting that needed to be done, some messes that they'd left, some junk that was still stuck in our basement. And so not everything was complete. Things were getting close enough that I was feeling good about the project. But I was refusing to make the final payment because the final work hadn't been done. And that's when the builder, Michael, came to me with the pity card. You see, he was still waiting for that final payment, and he owed a bunch of money to his subcontractors and he owed a bunch of money to his employees. And I could totally see the effect that that was having on everybody involved. I got calls from the plumber, I got calls from the electrician. When I'd see his guys here on the crew, they would tell me how they weren't getting paid. And it was at the end of the year, and all this was pulling on my heartstrings.
Buddy, you're softer than a Tootsie Roll fruit cup.
And so after Michael pleaded with me, I released that final payment, but had him agree to do some final work. And I held aside the money for that final work, which was about, I don't know, $2,000 or so. But in the grand scheme of things, that was peanuts. And that was such a mistake, because after that payment was made, he and his team completely disappeared. I spent weeks and months calling and texting him, trying to get a hold of him and tracking him down. And when I finally got a hold of him after months and months, I basically asked him yet again, hey, have you been getting my messages? And his response was, Construction is in the process of going out of business, so we will be unable to take on any other projects. And as I did a little investigation, what I found out was this guy was behind with a whole bunch of people. And what he did was he just folded the whole company and let his outstanding debts disappear with the company and let people try to go after him as a creditor, which is a long, arduous process. And the real kicker is I know that he started up another company and he's still doing construction work in the area. So if I can also offer one warning in this video, be sure to be on the lookout for Michael Construction or anything related to building of Field, Vermont. I had a horrible experience with them and I will never ever do business with them ever again. Now I feel like I have a whole bunch of lessons that I've learned from going through our farmhouse renovation that could apply to anyone who's about to undertake a home renovation, and I want to share them with you. But first, a quick word about our sponsor for today's video, Surfshark VPN. Now I'm sure as you're hearing this story you can understand that I've grown increasingly sensitive to safety and security, whether it's not trying to get ripped off by a builder or thinking about protecting my information or my identity online. You know, most internet users aren't even aware of the amount of surveillance, limitation, and data mining going on around their personal information that's happening on a daily basis. Surfshark VPN can get rid of all of these problems for you with an easy to use, one-for-all solution. Surfshark turns you into an anonymous and hard to trace online user and makes the internet a safer and more enjoyable place for you. I've been using VPNs for years to keep my information and data safe, and I have really enjoyed using Surfshark VPN's platform. It's very simple and easy to use. With just one easy click of the button, you can forget about data mining and advertisements and monitoring that can happen online. If you want to try Surfshark VPN for yourself, use promo code FARM to get a special deal. You'll get 83% off plus 3 extra months for free. Surf with your own set of rules. There's a link down in the description, and thank you to Surfshark VPN for sponsoring today's video and being part of the Cow Club. So what are those lessons that I've learned, you may ask? Well, number one is this: don't try to do too much at once. So often people are gonna buy a property and wanna do all the work on it all at once and just get it all over and done with. And to me, that's a mistake. If I had to do it over again, I would have done the work here on our farm in many more phases, doing it in chunks. The bigger your project, the bigger the likelihood of risk and the bigger of likelihood of having mistakes. If you're working on a smaller scale on smaller projects, you can put more attention to detail. You can think through some of the nuances that you need to think through. You're not confronted with a huge wall of decisions. And also the scale of your project's gonna be smaller, so you're able to move a little bit more nimbly. Which gets into my lesson number 2, which is that you should never, ever, ever believe in the sunk cost fallacy. After only a couple of months, I knew that the builder I was working with was really not a good guy, and the project was really not trending in the right way. But Allison and I stuck with them because we felt like we were stuck. We'd already given up money for a deposit, we'd already started the work, and because we were working on such a big scale, there were so many pieces in flight, it just didn't make sense for us to try to walk away. If we had been working at a smaller scale, we would have been able to just complete a portion of that project and move on to the next thing. We would have had more flexibility, we would have felt like we would have had less at risk, and I think that would have led to a better, less stressful outcome for us. Lesson number 3 is to avoid trying to do things from afar. The more and more I've gotten involved in the community here in Vermont's Northeast Kingdom, the more relationships I have and more resources I have access to. You need excavator work? I got a guy. You need electrical work? I got a guy. You need plumbing work? I got a guy. I've built up relationships of many great people in this area, and so as I have projects now, I know who I can turn to and rely on and trust. When you're not living in a community and you're just going online and looking for people, it's such a crapshoot on who you're gonna get, and the quality might not be there, and you don't necessarily understand the market, and you don't necessarily understand the people that you're working with, or even the culture that you're working within. I think trying to do construction projects from afar are a big mistake, and I would avoid ever trying to do it again unless I have some really key people working on it on the ground that I really very much trust. And you know, I get these emails from people who are thinking about moving across the country, and that they're buying a house that they've never actually physically seen, and they want to do some work and they're wondering the best way to try to tackle it. My best advice would be just wait. Despite the inconvenience of living through a renovation, you're gonna be so much better off if you can be on the ground supervising that relationship and supervising that renovation up close. And then the other thing, which is my 4th and final point, is take your time, get to know what works and what doesn't work for your house. live with that house for at least a year before you try to do any work on it. You know, Allison and I were in such a rush to work on this place and make improvements to this place, we never actually stopped to understand why the house was set up the way it was to begin with. You know, it's much like the comments I've made in the past about working on our farm and why it's important to really think through what's happening on your land and to observe and watch. You should be observing and watching with your home too. Again, I feel like we made a lot of renovation decisions based on a very, very small sample size. And Allison and I probably would have never had our big bathroom fight if we'd taken our time and gone slow with the process and really observed and thought about what worked best within this home. Now, I know in the grand scheme of things, we didn't get ripped off that bad. I've heard stories of people who've had builders who just took the money and ran. Most of the work got finished. You know, most of the things that were still on the builder's tick list, either I finished myself, or we hired somebody to do as a small project, or we're just kind of living with. But all of that said, I do still to this day feel angry and frustrated and embarrassed that we got duped and we made so many beginner mistakes. But I know, like most other hard lessons learned, it does make me a better person today. And I know that if I have to tackle more housework, I know what to do. Or at least I think I do. If you guys have lessons learned about your own home renovations, leave them down in the comments. I'd love to make this video a resource for other people who are starting to do their own home renovation work and home improvement work. And be sure to check out this video right here. It's pretty darn entertaining. Thanks for watching, guys.